My brother-in-law framed me for fraud, but I had the ultimate backup plan. I'm 35 now, and when people ask me about trust, I tell them about the sound a printer makes when it's secretly backing up files. It's this quiet, whirring noise, almost like a cat purring. Except cats don't destroy families. Printers apparently can save them. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start with the brunch. Easter Sunday, my mother-in-law, Patricia, had set the table with her good china, the kind with tiny blue flowers that she only brought out for holidays and funerals. I should have known something was wrong when she hugged me that morning. Patricia wasn't a hugger, especially not with me. In 6 years of marriage to her son Michael, I could count her genuine smiles toward me on one hand. I was wearing my yellow sundress, the one Michael said made me look like sunshine. I remember that detail, because it was the last compliment he ever gave me. I was arranging the fruit salad when the doorbell rang, and Patricia's face went pale in a way that told me she knew exactly who was at the door. "That'll be for you, dear," she said, not meeting my eyes. Two IRS agents stood on the porch, badges gleaming in the morning light. Agent Rodriguez was tall with kind eyes that apologized before he even spoke. Agent Chen was shorter, all business, clipboard in hand like she was checking items off a grocery list. "Sarah Chen Morrison?" Agent Rodriguez asked, though he already knew the answer. The whole family was watching from the dining room. Michael's brother David was there with his wife, Jessica, both of them looking like they were watching a movie they'd already seen. Patricia was clutching her pearls, literally clutching them. And Michael, my husband of 6 years, the man who'd promised to stand by me through everything, was sitting at the head of the table with his arms crossed, looking at me like I was a stranger who'd wandered into his house. "You're under arrest for tax fraud and embezzlement," Agent Chen said, and the words felt like stones dropping into still water. Everything after that was ripples. The handcuffs were cold. I remember thinking that was stupid to notice, but your brain does weird things when your life is falling apart. Patricia's neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, was watering her garden, pretending not to stare. The mimosa tree in the front yard had just started blooming. Those pink, fluffy flowers that I'd always thought looked like celebration. They looked different that day, like everything else. At the station, they put me in a room that smelled like burned coffee and disappointment. Agent Rodriguez sat across from me, his folder thick with papers that supposedly proved I was a criminal. "Mrs. Morrison, we have documentation showing your signature on financial documents for Morrison Construction, your brother-in-law's company. Documents that diverted over $200,000 into accounts. Linked to you." I stared at the papers he slid across the table. My signature was there. All right, perfect loops and curves, just like I'd been signing my name for 26 years. Except I'd never seen these documents before in my life. "I didn't sign these," I said, and my voice sounded small in that concrete room. Agent Rodriguez leaned back. "Mrs. Morrison, forgery is a serious accusation. Are you saying your brother-in-law forged your signature?" "I don't know what I'm saying. I just know I didn't sign these." The lawyer they assigned me was a tired-looking man named Gerald Keppel, who kept checking his watch and calling me Sandra. After the third time, I stopped correcting him. What was the point? Nobody was listening anyway. The bail hearing was a blur. Patricia and Michael sat in the back row, whispering to each other like I wasn't there. David wasn't there at all, which should have been my first clue. When you're supposedly the victim of someone's crime, you usually show up to court. I made bail thanks to my parents, who drove down from Portland, looking like they'd aged 10 years in one day. Mom kept patting my hand in the car, and Dad kept asking if I was hungry, as if sandwiches could fix what was broken. That first night back at home, Michael slept in the guest room. He said he needed time to think, needed space to process everything. I lay in our bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to him move around downstairs. Around midnight, I heard him on the phone, his voice low and careful. "I know, Mom. I just don't understand how she could do this to us." Like I was some outside threat instead of his wife. I couldn't eat for 3 days. Everything tasted like cardboard, and my stomach felt like it was lined with broken glass. My sister Emma called every hour, switching between fury and protective rage. She wanted to hire a private investigator, wanted to mortgage her house to pay for a better lawyer. Emma has always been a fighter, ever since we were kids, and she'd stand up to the bullies who made fun of my stutter. On Thursday, I finally called in sick to work. I'd been teaching third grade at Lincoln Elementary for 4 years, and I loved those kids like they were my own. But I couldn't face their innocent questions. Couldn't pretend everything was normal when my picture might be in the news by Friday. That's when I remembered Mittens was my rabbit when I was 12. A tiny gray Holland lop with ears that flopped over her eyes. She lived in a hutch in our backyard, and every day after school, I'd sit next to her cage and tell her about my day. About the kids who made fun of my secondhand clothes. About how I wanted to be a teacher, but wasn't sure I was smart enough. About how sometimes I felt invisible, even in my own family. One morning, I found her cage empty. The latch was open, and there were no signs of a struggle. She'd just vanished. My dad said she probably ran away, found a nice family of wild rabbits to live with. But I knew better. I knew someone had let her out on purpose. I suspected my older brother Tommy, who thought my attachment to a stupid rabbit was embarrassing. I never got proof, and Tommy never admitted it. But I learned something important that day about how people you trust can make you disappear without leaving fingerprints. Sitting in my kitchen that Thursday morning, staring at divorce papers Michael had left on the counter, I remembered that feeling, that helpless rage of knowing someone has wronged you but having no way to prove it. Then I looked at our old HP printer sitting on the desk in the corner, the one we'd inherited from Patricia when she upgraded last Christmas. And I remembered something I'd done months ago, back when I was still trying to be the perfect daughter-in-law. I'd been helping Patricia organize her files, scanning old documents and family photos. The printer had been acting up, so I'd installed a backup drive to make sure nothing got lost. A little external hard drive, smaller than a deck of cards, that would automatically save copies of everything that went through the machine. I'd completely forgotten about it until that moment. My hands were shaking as I checked the connection. The drive was still there, tucked behind the printer like a secret waiting to be discovered. When I plugged it into my laptop, my heart started racing. Hundreds of files, documents, emails, photos, everything that had been processed through that printer for the past 8 months, including I discovered multiple drafts of financial documents, with my signature being practiced, refined, perfected. David Morrison was a meticulous forger. I'll give him that. I found at least 20 practice sheets, each one getting closer to my actual signature. I found emails between him and his business partner about cash flow problems. I found correspondence with offshore accounts. And I found something that made my blood turn to ice. An email from David to Patricia, dated 2 weeks before my arrest. "Don't worry, Mom. Sarah's always been too trusting. She'll never see it coming, and Michael will choose family over her. He always does." I printed everything. Then I called Emma, and then I called the one person I knew would believe me, without question. Miss Elizabeth Harper had been my high school English teacher, but more than that, she'd been the first adult who ever made me feel like my thoughts mattered. She was 68 now, retired, living in a small house near the lake, with her 3 cats and more books than could fit on her shelf. "Sarah," she said when she answered the phone, and her voice was exactly the same as it had been 15 years ago. Warm, intelligent, concerned. "Honey, what's wrong?" I broke down completely, told her everything while sitting in my car in the Walmart parking lot, because I couldn't risk Michael overhearing. She listened without interrupting, the way she'd always listened. When I was 17 and convinced the world was ending because I'd gotten a B+ on an S. "Bring me everything," she said simply. "I'll help you make sense of it." Mrs. Harper's house smelled like coffee and old books. Exactly the way I remember. She'd set up her dining room table like a war room, with manila folders and highlighters and a legal pad covered in her precise handwriting. "We're going to organize this evidence properly," she said, putting on her reading glasses. "And then we're going to find you a lawyer who actually gives a damn." We worked for 6 hours, sorting documents, creating timelines, building a case. Mrs. Harper had a way of seeing patterns that I'd missed, connections that made David's scheme crystal clear. "He's been planning this for months," she said, holding up an email about Patricia's will. "Look at this. He's been worried about his inheritance, about the business failing. You were convenient, Sarah. A daughter-in-law nobody would fight too hard to protect. That stung because it was true. I'd never quite fit into the Morrison family. Too quiet, too bookish, not ambitious enough for their tastes. I taught elementary school while David ran a construction company. I preferred reading to shopping, small gatherings to big parties. I was easy to throw away. Miss Harper helped me find Janet Coleman, a criminal defense attorney who specialized in white-collar crime. Janet was everything Gerald Keppel wasn't. Sharp, focused, and genuinely angry about what had happened to me. "This is good work," Janet said, reviewing our organized evidence in her downtown office. "Really good work, but I need to prepare you for what's coming. Even with proof of forgery, your family is going to fight back. They're going to try to discredit you. Maybe claim you were in on it. Maybe argue that you knew, and were just better at covering your tracks." I felt my stomach drop. So this might not be enough. "Oh, it's enough," Janet said with a smile that was pure steel. "But it's going to get ugly before it gets better." She was right. The next few weeks were a nightmare of depositions and interrogations. Michael hired his own lawyer and filed for divorce, claiming I'd betrayed his trust and endangered his family's reputation. Patricia gave a statement to the police, suggesting I'd always been secretive about money, always asking questions about the family business. David, meanwhile, had disappeared, gone to visit his wife's family in Colorado. According to Patricia, extended vacation, she said. Nothing suspicious about that timing. I was staying with Mrs. Harper by then. Michael had changed the locks on our house, claiming it was necessary for his emotional well-being. I slept in her guest room, the one with faded floral wallpaper and a window that looked out over the lake. Some nights I'd sit on her back porch and watch the water, trying to remember who I used to be before all this started. Miss Harper would bring me tea and sit beside me, not talking, just being present the way she'd been when I was her student, and the world felt too big and scary to navigate alone. "You know what I remember about you in high school?" she said one evening. "You wrote an essay about Atticus Finch, about how sometimes doing the right thing means standing alone. You were 17, and you already understood something about integrity that most adults never figure out." "I don't feel very brave right now," I admitted. "Brave people are scared," she said. "That's what makes them brave." The preliminary hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday in October. I wore my Navy suit, the one I'd bought for job interviews, and tried to look like someone who belonged in a courtroom. Janet had warned me that David would probably be there, that his lawyer would try to paint me as the mastermind, and him as a reluctant accomplice. But when the prosecutor called David's case, his chair was empty. "Your Honor," his attorney said, looking uncomfortable, "my client is currently unavailable." Unavailable, like he was in a meeting instead of hiding from felony charges. The judge was not amused. "Mr. Brennan, your client was scheduled to appear today. Where exactly is he? We're having difficulty locating him." "Your Honor," Janet leaned over to whisper in my ear, "this is better than we hoped for. Flight is consciousness of guilt." But the Morrison family wasn't giving up that easily. After the hearing, Patricia cornered me in the hallway outside the courtroom. She looked smaller than I remembered, frailer, but her eyes were still sharp with anger. "You've destroyed this family," she said, her voice low and vicious. "Michael is having a breakdown because of you. David had to leave town because you've turned everyone against him. All because you can't accept responsibility for your own mistake." I stared at her, this woman who'd watched me get arrested at her dining room table, and felt something click into place, a kind of clarity I'd been missing for months. "Patricia," I said quietly, "your son forged my signature to steal money from his own company. I have video evidence, actually from your printer's backup system. You can hate me all you want, but the facts aren't going to change." Her face went white. "That's impossible." "Is it? Because I'm pretty sure you knew. I found emails. Patricia, between you and Dave, you knew what he was planning, and you helped him do it." She looked around the hallway like she was searching for escape routes. "You can't prove anything." "Actually, I can. Janet has everything, including the email where David thanks you for providing the practice documents with my signature on them." That was a bluff, but Patricia's expression told me I was close to something true. "The preliminary hearing for your obstruction charges is next month. Janet said, appearing beside us like a shark who'd smelled blood. Mrs. Morrison, I'd strongly recommend you get your own attorney. After Patricia hurried away, Janet and I sat in the courthouse cafeteria, reviewing our strategy. She was confident about the criminal case, but warned me that the civil suit would be more complicated. David's missing, which means recovering the money he stole will be difficult, and your husband's divorce filing is going to get nasty. He's claiming you hid assets, that you were complicit in the fraud. I stirred my coffee, thinking about the house Michael and I had bought together, the savings account we'd been building for the vacation to Ireland we'd never take now. I don't want his money, I said. I just want my name cleared. Good, Janet said, because fighting for stuff you don't need is how people lose sight of what matters. The criminal trial started in January. By then, David had been found in Costa Rica, living under his wife's maiden name and working at a beach resort. The extradition process would take months, but his flight had made my case much stronger. Michael testified for the prosecution. Finally, he looked terrible, like he hadn't been sleeping, and when Janet cross-examined him, his voice shook. Mr. Morrison, did your wife ever have access to your brother's business accounts? No. Did she ever express interest in your brother's company finances? No. She always said she didn't understand business stuff. Did she ever give you any reason to suspect she was involved in financial crimes? A long pause. No. Yet when your brother was caught forging her signature, you immediately assumed she was guilty. Why? Michael's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. The jury could see what I'd been too hurt to recognize. Michael had wanted to believe I was guilty, because it was easier than admitting his brother was a criminal. Patricia was arrested during the trial's second week. The obstruction charges were serious enough to warrant jail time, but she negotiated a plea deal in exchange for testifying against David. Her testimony was devastating. David said Sarah was perfect for the plan because nobody really liked her anyway, she said from the witness stand, not looking at me. He said if she went to prison, it wouldn't be a real loss to the family. I felt Mrs. Harper's hand squeeze mine. She'd been in the courtroom every day, taking notes, offering quiet support. After Patricia's testimony, she walked me outside to the courthouse steps. I'm sorry you had to hear that, she said. I'm not, I replied, and surprised myself by meaning it. I needed to know who they really are. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts of forgery and fraud. When the verdict was read, I didn't feel victorious. I felt empty, like I'd been holding my breath for so long that I'd forgotten how to exhale. But that feeling didn't last, because 3 days later, Janet called with news that changed everything. David's ready to make a deal, she said. Full restitution, cooperation with recovering the hidden assets, and a formal statement clearing your name. He's looking at serious prison time, and he knows it. The meeting was held in a conference room at the prosecutor's office. David looked like a different person, smaller and grayer, wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of his usual expensive suits. When he saw me, he couldn't meet my eyes. I'm sorry, he said, and his voice was barely a whisper. I never meant for it to go this far. I stared at him across the table. This man, who'd been part of my family for 6 years, who'd eaten at my table and borrowed my car and destroyed my life because it was convenient. You practiced my signature for weeks, I said. You planned this for months. You absolutely meant for it to go this far. He nodded, tears running down his face. The business was failing. I was going to lose everything. I thought if I could just buy some time, I could fix it without anyone getting hurt. I got hurt, I said simply. I got arrested at Easter brunch while your mother watched. I lost my husband, my home, my reputation, all so you could buy time. I know. I'm sorry. I'll pay everything back. I swear. Janet leaned forward. Miss Morrison, as part of your plea agreement, you'll be making a public statement acknowledging that Mrs. Chan Morrison had no knowledge of or involvement in your crimes. You'll also be paying her legal fees and damages for the harm done to her reputation. After the meeting, I walked to the diner across the street and ordered coffee. I didn't want. The booth was cracked vinyl, and the fluorescent lights hummed like insects. It felt like the right place to sit, and figure out what came next. Mrs. Harper found me there an hour later. She slid into the opposite seat like we'd planned to meet, ordered pie, and waited for me to talk. "It's over," I said finally. "The legal part is over," she corrected gently. "How do you feel?" I thought about that. How did I feel? Not happy, exactly. Not sad either. Something more like free. Like I can breathe again, I said. Like I'm not waiting for the other shoe to drop. Mrs. Harper smiled. Good. Because now comes the interesting part. Which is figuring out who Sarah Chen Morrison is when she's not trying to be the perfect daughter-in-law. The divorce was finalized in March. Michael kept the house, and I kept my dignity, which felt like a fair trade. He sent a letter through his lawyer afterward, apologizing for not believing me, asking if we could meet for coffee to find closure. I wrote back through Janet, "The closure is that I know who you are now." I moved into a small apartment near the lake, close enough to Mrs. Harper that we could have dinner together when we wanted company. It had big windows and room for bookshelves, and nobody there had ever thought I wasn't quite good enough. Teaching had saved me during the whole ordeal. Kids don't care about your legal problems. They just want you to help them with long division and remember to ask about their soccer game. Principal Martinez had been supportive throughout everything, and when the newspaper ran a story about the case being resolved, she made sure everyone knew I'd been completely exonerated. But something had changed in me during those months of fighting for my innocence. I discovered I was stronger than I'd thought, more resilient than I'd believed. And I'd learned that sometimes the people who should protect you are the ones you need protection from. Miss Harper and I were sitting on her porch one evening, in late spring, watching the sun set over the lake, when she made an unexpected offer. "I've been thinking about updating my will," she said casually. "I don't have children, and my sister's family lives across the country. We barely I looked at her, not sure where this was going. "You've become like a daughter to me this past year," she continued. "More than that, really. A true friend. Someone who understands what it means to stand up for what's right even when it's difficult. Mrs. Harp, I'd like to name you as my heir," she said, simply. "And I'd like you to consider legally becoming my daughter." I stared out at the water, watching a family of ducks paddle past. "You want to adopt me? I'm 26 years old. Adult adoption is perfectly legal, and it would mean you'd have family who actually values you. Family who would never stand by and watch you be destroyed for someone else's convenience." I started crying then. Not sad tears, but something deeper. Relief, maybe, or recognition. The feeling of being chosen by someone who saw my worth instead of my usefulness. "Yes," I said. "I'd like that very much." The adoption was finalized in June. Sarah Chen Morrison became Sarah Chen Harper, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt like I belonged somewhere completely. David was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. Patricia got 2 years, suspended with community service and probation. The money was recovered, mostly, though some had been spent on David's Costa Rica adventure. Michael moved back in with his mother after the divorce, which seemed fitting somehow. I ran into him once at the grocery store. About a year after everything was settled, he looked like he wanted to say something, kept opening his mouth and then closing it again. Finally, he managed. "How are you doing, Sarah?" "I'm doing well," I said, and meant it. "I'm teaching 4th grade now, and I love it. I have a new apartment, and I'm thinking about going back to school for my master's degree." That's good. "I'm glad you're okay." I looked at this man I'd once loved enough to marry, this person who'd thrown me away rather than stand up to his family, and felt mostly pity. "Michael," I said gently, "I need you to know something. What happened to me wasn't okay. It wasn't a misunderstanding or a family dispute. Your brother committed crimes, and your family helped him. You chose to believe I was a criminal rather than consider that your family might be lying to you." He nodded, not meeting my eyes. "I know. I'm sorry. I hope you've learned something from this." About loyalty and what it really means, about how you treat people when they're vulnerable." "I have," he said. "I really have." I believed him, but it didn't matter anymore. Some betrayals teach you important lessons about forgiveness, about moving forward. Others teach you about boundaries, about protecting yourself from people who've proven they can't be trusted. This was the second kind. Mrs. Harper passed away 3 years later, peacefully, in her sleep after a short illness. She left me her house, her books, and most importantly, the certainty that I was loved unconditionally. At her funeral, people kept telling me how lucky I'd been to have her in my life, but they had it backward. Elizabeth Harper had been lucky to have me. She'd said so in her will, in a letter she'd left for me to read after she was gone. Sarah, it said, you taught an old teacher something new. That family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about showing up when it matters, believing in each other when the world gets dark, and fighting for what's right, even when you're standing alone. You have been the daughter of my heart, and I am proud of the woman you've become. I still live in her house by the lake. I teach 5th grade now at a different school, one where the principal appreciates teachers who understand that education is about more than test scores. I have a garden where I grow tomatoes and herbs, and a cat named Fitzgerald who thinks he's a literary critic. Last month I got a Facebook message from Jessica, David's wife. She divorced him while he was in prison and moved back to her hometown with their kids. She wanted to apologize for not speaking up during the trial, for knowing something was wrong, but being too scared to act. I should have said something, she wrote. I knew David was desperate about money, and I knew he resented you for some reason. I should have warned you. I wrote back, thanking her for the apology, but telling her I didn't mean. Not because I wasn't hurt by her silence, but because I'd learned something important about carrying other people's guilt. You can't fix betrayal by accumulating enough apologies. You fix it by deciding you're worth protecting, by building a life where that kind of betrayal can't reach. People sometimes ask me if I'm bitter about what happened, if I regret marrying into the Morrison family, if I wish I could go back and change things. The answer is complicated. I regret the pain, the months of fear and uncertainty, the way my trust in people was damaged. I regret that Michael chose his family's version of events over the truth, that Patricia could watch me be arrested without flinching, that David thought I was disposable enough to frame for his crimes. But I don't regret learning who they really were, and I don't regret discovering who I really am when pushed to my limits. The truth is, I'm stronger now than I was before, more careful about who I trust, but also more confident in my own judgment. I know what it feels like to stand up for myself when everyone else is sitting down. I know what it's like to be completely alone and discover that you're still standing. Most importantly, I know the difference between being family and being related, between being loved and being tolerated, between being protected and being convenient. I'm 35 now, and when people ask me about trust, I tell them about the sound a printer makes when it's secretly backing up files, how sometimes the things that save you are small and quiet and easily overlooked, how justice isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just a little hard drive that nobody remembered was there. And I tell them about boundaries, about how saying no to people who've hurt you isn't cruel, it's necessary, about how protecting yourself from betrayal isn't paranoid, it's why. The lake outside my window is calm this morning, reflecting the sky like a mirror. Fitzgerald is asleep in a patch of sunlight, and I have papers to grade before lunch. It's a quiet life, a peaceful one, built on the foundation of hard-learned lessons about who deserves access to your heart. Sometimes people you trust will try to make you disappear, but sometimes, if you're patient and careful, and refuse to stay silent, you discover that you're much harder to erase than they thought. Sometimes the backup drive saves more than just files. Sometimes it saves you.